The coins hit the floor at 8:47 on a Tuesday night. Quarters, dimes, one of them spinning. That particular sound, metal on tile, getting smaller and smaller until it stopped. A 74-year-old woman stood at the counter with her handbag and her $4.17, and the man behind the counter looked at her and decided she wasn't worth it. He didn't know the man in the corner booth had watched every second of it. He didn't know that man was her son. And he had no idea, none at all, what was already in motion before those coins stopped spinning. That night cost Sal Marchetti everything. Not in the way of stories where a man gets what's coming to him in some dramatic fashion. In the quieter, more permanent way. The way a door closes and doesn't open again. This is how it happened. 6 occupied tables that night. A trucker working through pie at the counter. 2 women sharing coffee by the window. A teenager with a textbook open in a booth he'd probably been sitting in for 2 hours. Ordinary Tuesday. Nothing worth remembering. Except the corner. He'd been there since before the rain started. Ordered coffee, thanked the waitress by name. She'd say later she didn't know how he knew it. She'd only started 2 weeks ago. He tipped her before she'd come back to refill the cup. Then he set his hands flat on the table and didn't move. Large hands, a gold signet ring on the right. No phone, no watch, no newspaper. Just a man sitting the way very few people actually know how to sit. Without fidgeting, without performing patience. Actually still. Under the table, barely visible, a Belgian Malinois lay with its chin on its front paws. It wasn't sleeping. Shadid's eyes tracked the room, each person who shifted in their seat, each waitress who moved between tables, with the steady attention of something that had been trained to miss very little. It didn't react to noise. It reacted only to the man above it. And the man above it hadn't moved in 40 minutes. When the door opened, the dog didn't look at the door. It looked at the man in the booth. A small woman in a gray overcoat came in out of the rain. White hair, dark hat, cloth handbag held close. She stopped just inside the entrance and caught her breath. A brief pause, a hand smoothing her coat. Then moved toward the counter. The man in the corner saw her the moment she stepped through. Something changed in him. Not much. The kind of thing you'd miss unless you were already watching. His shoulders settled differently. His hands, still flat on the table, pressed down slightly, the way hands do when a person is deciding not to stand up yet. He set his coffee cup down very carefully, kept his eyes on her. At his feet, the dog lifted its head 1 inch off its paws and held it there. Her name was Rosa Conti. She'd walked 3 blocks in the rain because her daughter had called from the hospital. Early labor, no time. And Rosa had no car, and the cab dispatcher said 40 minutes. She had $4.17 in her purse. She needed somewhere to sit, to get warm, to wait. She just wanted a cup of tea. She chose the stool at the far end of the counter, out of the way, and her hands were cold and a little stiff when she worked off her gloves. She had to pull each finger separately. And she set them beside her bag and raised her hand to get someone's attention. Not waving, just a small, patient lift of the wrist, the kind you learn when you've spent a lifetime not wanting to be a bother. The young waitress started moving toward her. She didn't get there. Sal came out from behind the prep station and stepped directly into the gap between them. Deliberate, unhurried, like a man who'd done this kind of thing before and didn't feel the need to rush it. He was heavy-set, his apron carrying the marks of the day, a gold chain at the collar of his shirt. He looked at Rosa, the way you look at something you've already made a decision about. He said this was a place of business, that his father's charity had died with him, that if she wasn't ordering a meal, She was taking up space for a paying customer. He said, "Move along." He'd known her name for 30 years. He'd seen her at Mass, at the butcher on the corner, at the school events when the kids were young. She wasn't a stranger. That was the thing. She was someone he had simply never seen any reason to treat well. He had not always been like this. There was a version of Sal Marchetti, younger, before the books became the only thing that mattered, who understood that a diner was more than its margins. His father had understood it. But Sal had looked at his father's generosity and seen inefficiency. And over 20 years he had systematically replaced one with the other and told himself the whole time that he was just being realistic. Rosa looked up at him. She didn't argue. She opened her handbag and counted out coins, quarters, a few dimes, nickels, and stacked them on the counter. Neat, deliberate. Then she said, without looking at him, "My son would say how you treat someone with nothing tells you everything about a person." She put the last coin on the stack, looked up, said, "Tea, please." Sal looked at the coins. Something moved across his face, fast, gone before it fully arrived, like he'd almost recognized something and then decided not to. He swept the coins off the counter with the back of his hand. They hit the floor loud. The diner didn't go silent. It just dropped. Sure, the way the volume in a room drops when something happens that everyone registers but no one acknowledges. The spinning dime was the only sound for a moment. Then that stopped too. He told her they didn't run a shelter. Said there was a church on Fifth. Rosa Conti didn't cry. She wasn't that kind of woman. She picked up her handbag, stood, buttoned the top button of her coat, that small, composed gesture, and walked toward the door without looking back at him. She moved the way women move when they've decided the room isn't worth another second of their attention. That's when the man in the corner stood up. The coffee cup vibrated once when he pushed back from the table. Just once. He was on his feet before the sound finished. The dog rose with him. No word. No gesture anyone in the room could identify. The animal simply came up from the floor in one motion and stood at his left side. And its eyes went directly to Sal Marchetti and did not leave him. Not threatening. That's not quite the right word. More like the dog had been given a problem to solve and was now solving it. They crossed the floor together. Not fast. The pace of a man who's never needed to hurry to be taken seriously. Every person in the room was watching, and none of them would have admitted it. He stopped a few feet from Sal and said, "Pick them up. Everyone. Bring them to pick them up. Everyone. Bring them to her. And apologize." Sal's eyes went to the dog. The dog's eyes did not move, did not blink. Whatever Sal was looking for, some signal, some reassurance, he didn't find it. He told them both to get out. The man looked at him for a moment, and then nodded once. A small, final movement, the kind that doesn't invite a response. He put on his coat. He walked to the door, held it open, and his mother walked out ahead of him into the rain. The cab had just pulled up. He helped her in, paid the driver, gave him extra. Then stood on the sidewalk with the rain coming down and watched the cab's taillights until they were gone. He stayed there another few seconds, looking up at the diner's neon sign. Then he made a call, spoke for less than a minute, hung up. He and the dog walked away into the rain. Nobody followed. Nobody stopped him. Nobody knew yet that they should have. Antonio Mancini had a saying, "A diner is just a kitchen with witnesses." He meant it as a compliment to both. He opened Dante's in 1961. $40, a borrowed flour sifter, and a recipe his mother had made him memorize before she'd let him leave Palermo. the kind that doesn't get written down. It lives in your hands, or it doesn't live at all. He worked the counter himself for 18 years, and he knew every regular, not just their names, their situations. Who was between jobs? He whose kid had just gotten into the high school across town, who needed the soup left on a little longer because their teeth weren't what they used to be. He tracked all of it without being asked to. Once, he fed a family of 6 through an entire winter. Never said a word about it. The father found out from a neighbor and came in to pay him back. Antonio looked at him like he was confused and handed him a slice of pie. When he died in 79, people stood outside in the rain for an hour. Some of them hadn't been in the diner in years. They just came. The way you show up when a place that made you feel like you belonged is suddenly just a building on a corner. Sal watched from inside, through the window. He thought they were being dramatic. 3 weeks later, he had the menu laminated and raised the prices on the soup. There's a choice you make when you're raising a child alone in a place that doesn't give you much. You can teach them to be hard, to protect themselves, or you can teach them to be soft and trust, without any real evidence, that it's the stronger thing. Rosa Conti chose the second. Every day, without making a production of it. Her husband Marco died on a Tuesday morning in 1976. Heart attack. He was 51 and Rosa was 49, and he was the kind of man who fixed things before you noticed they were broken. She didn't fall apart. That evening she made dinner because Vincent needed to eat, and grief doesn't exempt a boy from being fed. She raised him alone after that. Dry cleaners during the day, 3 nights a week in the kitchen of a restaurant on Clement Street. She'd come home smelling like steam and garlic and never once complained about it. She'd hang her coat, check his homework, ask what he wanted for breakfast tomorrow. One night, Vincent was maybe 12, he asked her if she was ever angry. She actually thought about it. Said, "About what?" He couldn't find the right words. So he just said, "Everything." And she put her hand on the side of his face. She always did that, like she was taking a reading of something. And told him angry was for people who thought they'd been promised something, that they hadn't been promised anything, that they'd just gotten here. He never forgot it. He carried it into every room he ever walked into. He carried it into that diner. People who didn't know Vincent Conti sometimes said he was cold. It wasn't the right word. Cold suggests distance. Vincent wasn't distant. He was precise. There's a difference, and it matters. He'd grown up here, in these streets. When growing up here meant figuring out fast what was real and what was a performance, who kept their word and who just said they would. He learned early that the loud version of loyalty and the real version were usually not the same thing. He never confused them after that. He'd made certain choices in his life. He wasn't going to explain them. But there was one thing, one line he'd drawn and held for a long time, that didn't bend. The neighborhood didn't get touched. The families, the old people, the women walking home at night, the kids, the places where ordinary people spent their ordinary Sundays when they'd scrape together enough for a meal out. None of it. He'd come that Tuesday to visit a grave, a man named Caruso, his father's oldest friend, dead the previous November, and to bring him here and let him drink, to bring him here, and let him drink chocolate milk at the counter, and for a little while, the world felt like it had order. He hadn't planned on anything else happening. That was the thing about Vincent Conti. He rarely planned. The events that shaped his life had a way of arriving on their own. The next morning, Sal pulled into the lot, and there were 3 men there he'd never seen before. Not doing anything, just standing with coffee cups, watching the street. When he got out of his car, one of them checked his watch. Not at Sal, just at the watch. And that was it. That was all they did. He almost talked himself into believing it was nothing. Then his phone started. Meat supplier at 8:15. Contract review, totally routine, they'd be in touch. Linen service at 9. Scheduling conflict? Might be a few weeks. His bread vendor sent a different driver, a guy Sal didn't recognize, who handed over a form saying the account was under administrative hold and didn't make eye contact while he said it. Each one had a reason. Each reason was plausible. Not one of them was a threat. But Sal had run this place for 20 years and he understood what a pattern looked like. And this was a pattern. By noon, 3 tables that were always full sat empty. He told himself weather. He told himself slow week. By day 2, he'd stopped telling himself anything. He went to the back office and shut the door. Without the noise of the front, the only sound was the refrigeration unit under the counter. A low, constant hum he'd apparently been filtering out for 20 years without knowing it. He sat at his desk and picked up the phone. Here's the thing about connections. There's an age when a man stops being able to tell the difference between people who owe him something and people who are actually with him. Sal had crossed that age without noticing. He made 6 calls. The first 3 rang out. No machine, no voicemail, just ringing. He didn't leave messages. He wouldn't have known what to say. The 4th picked up fast. Second ring, which meant the man had seen Sal's number and answered it anyway, and Sal took that as a decent sign. He said Rosa Conti's name. The line went quiet for a moment. Then the man told him not to call this number, and hung up. Sal sat with the phone in his hand, then dialed the 5th. The 5th man picked up, and didn't say anything, just held the line open, the way you'd hold a door for someone you wanted to watch walk through it. Sal could hear his breathing. Behind it, faintly. A television, some game show, the kind where the audience applauds on cue. Normal life. 3 feet away from a man who was using silence the way other men use a raised voice. Sal said, "It's Sal." The breathing didn't change. He said, "I need to talk to you." 7 seconds. 8. The game show crowd applauded for someone. The 5th man hung up without a word. That was somehow the worst one. Because silence means you've already been discussed. It means the decision was made before you called. Sal set the phone on the desk, looked at the wall for a second, then picked it back up. The 6th number rang 4 times. Then a voice he recognized. A man he'd known since they were teenagers in this same neighborhood. A voice that had gotten older, but was still unmistakably itself. The man said, "Sal." Just that. Sal started to say he needed something and the man cut him off. Said he knew what Sal needed. 5 seconds of quiet. Sal didn't fill it. He'd spent his whole life filling silence, and for once, he didn't. The man said, "You touched Vincent Conti's mother." Sal started to say he hadn't known who she was. The man stopped him again. Said it didn't matter. 4 seconds. Can then. Nobody's going to help you with this. Not me. Not anyone. Don't call this number again. The line didn't slam. It just ended. The way a door closes when the person on the other side has already moved on to the next room. Sal went back out to the counter, picked up a rag, started wiping the surface out of pure habit. 10,000 times. That same motion, that same counter. He stopped when he reached the spot where the coins had been. He stood there with the rag in his hand and looked at it. Really looked, for the first time since Tuesday. The jukebox was playing to 3 people in a room that used to need a wait on weekday mornings. Nobody came to bother him. There was nothing left that needed bothering. 4 days after the calls. Early morning, before the sign got turned on. Sal was wiping down the counter alone. Chairs still up on the tables. The neon dark parking lot empty outside the window. The diner had a different quality to it without customers. Quieter than quiet. The kind of quiet that had a sound of its own. He'd already spoken to his attorney. He'd already read the letter from the holding company. He knew it was over in the practical sense. The lease, the supplies, the building itself. What he hadn't figured out yet was what to do with the knowledge. Not fully. It hadn't settled into him yet the way things have to settle before you can actually carry them. The bell above the door rang. Cold air came in first, then Vincent Conti. No dog this time. No coat. Dark sweater, dark trousers. Nothing to indicate this was anything but a man who'd decided to stop somewhere on his way to something else. And he stepped inside and let the door close behind him and stood there a moment, looking at the room. Sal didn't say anything. Couldn't find where to start. Vincent didn't seem to need him to. He looked around the way you look at a place you have specific memories of. The empty tables, the chairs up, the jukebox dark in the corner. He was quiet about it. Not sad, not satisfied, just looking. And Sal watched him look. And something happened that hadn't happened to him before. He saw the room from outside himself. Not the diner he'd managed for 20 years. The diner he'd made it into. The warmth that used to be here. The reason people had stood in the rain when his father died, slowly and deliberately replaced with something efficient and cold. The empty tables weren't Vincent's doing. Sal understood that now, standing there. They'd been coming for years. Vincent had just moved the date up. Vincent came to the counter, sat down one stool from where Rosa had been sitting 4 days ago, folded his hands on the formica and looked at Sal across it. He said, Antonio made good coffee, almost conversationally, like they were picking up in the middle of something. Sal opened his mouth. Nothing came. Vincent said his father used to bring him here when he was 8 or 9, that Sal's father would give him chocolate milk and talk about the neighborhood, how it was worth protecting, see how the people in it deserved to have someone looking out for them. He looked down at the counter for a moment, then up. He said, She's 74. She walked 3 blocks in the rain. She had $4. She wanted to sit down. Sal's hands went tight on the counter edge. His jaw moved, but he didn't speak. He looked down at the floor. The same tiles, the same pattern, where the coins had scattered. He wanted to say sorry. When the word had been sitting in him since 2 a.m. 2 nights ago, when he'd lain there in the dark listening to the sound of those coins hitting the floor on repeat, like something his brain wouldn't let go of. But he understood. And this was perhaps the first true thing he'd understood in a while, that sorry said now would be for his own relief, not for Rosa's. It would be Sal asking to feel better. And Vincent would know that. And honestly, so would Sal. And it would be worse than saying nothing. So he said nothing, and stood there and let himself be seen for what he was, without any of the usual exits. Vincent stood up, didn't offer a hand, buttoned his sweater and walked toward the door. Stopped at the threshold with his back still to the room. Your father would have given her the tea. The door opened. Bell rang. Cold air again, briefly, then quiet. Sal stood behind the counter his father had built with borrowed money and a recipe nobody wrote down, and he put both hands flat on the formica, and he thought about all the years he'd stood in this exact spot telling himself he was being practical, realistic, smart. He didn't move for a long time. Next afternoon he drove to St. Mary's in Hoboken. Stopped at a Shell station and bought white carnations. The wrapped kind, already starting to droop a little by the time he got to the lobby. He had a clean shirt on. He was holding the flowers the way a man holds something when he doesn't quite know what he's going to do with it. He told himself he was going because it was right. Maybe that was even true. But some part of him also needed to put the word sorry into a room where it might actually land somewhere, and this was the only room left. He found the floor, found the room number, stopped in the hallway. The door was open. Rosa was in a chair by the bed, holding a newborn, pink blanket, tiny fist visible above the edge of it. Her daughter was beside her, and the two of them were talking in that low, private way that new mothers and grandmothers talk. On the far side of the room, standing at the window looking out at the November gray, was Vincent. He was just standing, not on his phone, not doing anything. The posture of a man who is exactly where he's supposed to be. Then Rosa said something that made her daughter laugh, and Rosa laughed too. A real laugh, the kind that starts in the chest. Unguarded. She had her granddaughter in her arms and her daughter beside her, and she laughed like someone who had not been in a diner 4 days ago getting her coin swept onto the floor. Vincent turned from the window at the sound of it. And just for a second, one unguarded second, the thing he usually carried with him was gone. He looked at his mother laughing, and he was just her son. Sal stood in the hallway with the wilting carnations. He didn't go in. Vincent turned back toward the window, and in doing so, his eyes passed through the open doorway into the hall. He saw Sal, held it, 1 second, maybe less. And then his gaze moved back to the glass and the gray sky and whatever was out there. Not anger, not contempt, not even recognition, really. More like a man noting something peripheral that requires no action. Sal set the flowers on a chair in the hallway. He went to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. He looked at the wall.
Rosa didn't ask Vincent why he'd come to the neighborhood that night. She knew about the grave. She always made sure not to call him on that day. She'd said once that a man needs some hours that belong only to him and the people he's lost, and she respected that without making a thing of it. She also didn't ask about the diner. She'd heard something had happened, a neighbor mentioned it, said the man behind the counter had been unkind to her. Rosa had shrugged it off. People say things, she said. It doesn't make them true. What she asked Vincent, while her granddaughter's fingers curled around her thumb, was whether he remembered what she used to tell him when he came home upset because some kid at school had said something cruel. He turned from the window, said she'd told him to feel sorry for them. She asked him why. Because, he said, a person who has to make someone feel small is already living in a very small place. She looked at the baby, said that's right, almost to herself. Then she kissed the top of her granddaughter's head and said she hoped the girl would have patience. That the world had a lot of people living in small places, and you had to learn how to be sorry for them without letting it undo you every time. Vincent looked at her. This woman who'd worked 2 jobs without complaining once, who'd put her hand on his face when he was 12 and told him they hadn't been promised anything, who'd walked 3 blocks in the rain to be there for her daughter and sat down at a counter with her $4 and asked for nothing but a cup of tea, and when a man tried to make her feel small, had simply gathered herself and left, intact, every bit of her dignity still with her. Everything Vincent had ever been, every room he'd walked into, every moment he'd held ground without raising his voice, he had learned from watching her. She'd never taught it directly. She'd just lived it, and he'd been paying attention. He didn't say any of this. He walked over, sat in the chair beside her, and looked at his mother holding his niece. The room was very quiet. That was enough. Rosa never knew the full shape of what had happened that fall. She knew Vincent had been in town. She knew the diner had closed. She said, "What a shame. Antonio's father built that place," and went back to looking at her granddaughter. Dante's diner closed in December. The following spring, the building was renovated. The ground floor became a community center, no charge, open to the neighborhood, funded by a holding company that nobody had heard of before and didn't hear much from after. Sal opened a smaller place in another county. People who knew him said he ran it differently. Quieter, they said, more careful. He never had a dog. The Belgian Malinois, they called him Dante, after the diner, after the man who built it lived another 9 years. He's buried in the yard of a house on Ferrero Street. Vincent Conti died at home 11 years later in the house where he was born. Hundreds of people came. They came quietly. The neighborhood closed its shutters for the day. In the church at the end of the block, there's a stained glass window. A woman pouring tea for a traveler at a counter. Below it, in Italian. Chi disprezza il povero, offend il suo creator. Whoever mocks the poor insults their creator. Nobody in the parish knows who paid for it. But the old women in the neighborhood always cross themselves when they walk past it. And they smile. Rosa said it to a stack of coins on a counter, without looking at him. My son would say how you treat someone with nothing tells you everything about a person. She wasn't talking to Sal, really. She was talking to herself, or to the coins, or to some version of the room that existed before Sal's father died, and his son took over and raised the prices on the soup. Sal heard it. He just didn't listen. That's the thing about moments like this one. They don't announce themselves. They arrive looking like nothing. A woman in a wet coat, a small stack of coins, a spinning dime slowing down on a checkered floor. And by the time a person understands what they've done, the coins have already stopped moving. The diner is already going quiet. And somewhere in the corner, a dog has already lifted its head. Thanks for watching. If you love to have more of this, please like and subscribe. Thanks.